Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
To err is human, but to err is Jordan. Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party. On today's episode we are courtside to review The Last Dance, the ESPN Netflix documentary that looks back at the 97-98 Chicago Bulls NBA season as they go for their 6th championship and the second three-peat. I'm your co-host Alice King, and with me is the Scottie Pippen to my Michael Jordan. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Good. I didn't realise we had some simmering resentment and beef after all these years of knowing each other.
You did get that pizza I sent you,
yeah? Sadly so.
Indeed. So, Lee, this has been, Netflix are notorious for, these must-watch documentaries. We've had Making of a Murderer, we've had Tiger King, just a couple of months ago, and then they just seem to have the monopoly on this, and this is a slightly different one, and this is a sports documentary, but an epic one over 10 episodes. It was released over the last 5 weeks, 2 episodes every week. I mean, when did you sort of first hear about Last Dance? Were you looking forward to it? And most importantly, I guess, are you a basketball fan?
So the first time I'd heard about this was when you recommended it on our sort of weekly recommendations, and I've never been a basketball fan or anything like that, so it never it was like one of those things like, oh yeah, I can imagine that's somewhat interesting. I think kind of midway through the run of it on sort of Netflix, ESPN, it wasn't just you I was hearing it from, it was starting to become everyone that was talking about it, and I thought, you know what, I'm in lockdown, I've been kind of doing things in sort of phases, as it were. So before then I'd sort of been catching up on some TV shows, and then with then I kind of did a blitz of The Last Dance. Then I went into before Last Dance I blitzed to the finish line of my 52 films by women challenge, and then I was like, right, what am I going to watch next? I will give a go to The Last Dance. What's the worst that can happen? It'll be one okay episode and maybe I'll watch some more, or it's one of these Netflix shows I'll put on the back burner. I mean, I kind of got through Tiger King, but it kind of became a bit of a slog towards the end. I was kind of just watching it with my girlfriend because something to watch. And then you get things like The Making a Murderer, which I maybe watched 1 or 2 episodes of and never bothered with. So The Last Dance was something that really gripped me, but I was maybe a bit late to the party midway through.
I mean, so yeah, what point did you join? I mean, did you get to blitz about sort of 3 to 4, or was it about 5 or 6 episodes you got to catch up in a run?
Yeah, 5 to 6. I sort of watched one, then gave it a few days, then a couple more days, and then I was sort of by the finish line. I was there sort of with everyone for, right, that's episode 10 down, here on Netflix now. I can kind of finally watch it. So yeah, it was kind of weekly towards the tail end. So I kind of spaced it out a little bit at the start, then got really hooked, and then had to sort of be like everyone else and wait weekly.
Yeah, because I mean, even if you haven't seen The Last Dance, if you're on Twitter, I think you're probably aware of it from the various memes, which mostly seem to come from Michael Jordan's facial reactions to questions and watching an iPad and stuff like that. So, it's around there. I mean, I guess if you're not really a basketball fan, I guess you probably weren't really... Did you have much knowledge of... I mean, I'm assuming you've heard of Michael Jordan, but did you have much knowledge of the Chicago Bulls in that sort of period in the 90s when they were pretty much unstoppable, as long as they had Michael Jordan on their team?
Yeah, I basically knew bare minimum really going in. I mean, the most basketball I've ever watched has been in Uncut Gems. So, but like there's things I would know. Like I could name like a couple of teams. Like I could name the Boston Celtics. I could have named the Chicago Bulls. I mean, I was a kid of the 90s, so everyone knew of sort of the Chicago Bulls. Everyone kind of had the red top. I think you could get that like at JD Sports or whatever like that. People would have that. I knew about Air Jordans. That was like well established. I knew of Michael Jordan as sort of playing for the Chicago Bulls. Like those things like were a given, but in terms of any sort of real detail, I knew very little about them, what their achievements were. I just consider them sort of one of the big names. If someone went to me like, come up with a pointless, answer for that of like name a team, I'd be like, Chicago Bulls and Boston Celtics. I couldn't have named your Utah Jazz, your Indiana Pioneers, all those sorts of things.
Pacers, the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah. So like all these little things were just completely away from my mind.
Okay, so yeah, no, it must have been quite interesting to, I guess, you probably had an idea where it was going to go, and the fact that they probably were going to get their second three-peat, but I guess the rest of it would have been really sort of interesting to watch with fresh eyes, because, I mean, that period in the 90s I was really into basketball at that point. I think I got into basketball. I think it was probably the 92 Olympics was probably with the dream team, the first time that the USA had put professional players into the tournament, and I guess that was on sort of BBC and stuff like that, so you could watch that, and it was like they were on another level to everyone else. It was just crazy, and that's what sort of brought basketball, I think, to the attention of the UK. And then I think that's when Sky Sports picked up NBA. Obviously, it was difficult to watch it live, but I'd certainly kept track of those seasons. I played a bit of basketball at school as well, so I was following that, in terms of players. Obviously, I'm not black and 6'5", so therefore I was probably, in terms of playing ability, I was probably more of the sort of Steve Kerr sort of level, sort of, of the sort of doing the long shots and stuff like that. I mean, I remember basically, it was a bunch of white boys at Aberdeen Grammar School basically trying to play basketball. It was basically, a lot of the time was spent in practice, doing buzzer beaters, trying to get it in from the halfway line and stuff like that. But, there was no chance that any of us, sort of like 5'8", were going to be dunking the ball, because, we'd seen White Men Can't Jump starring Woody Harrelson, so we knew that it was probably not possible. But I was into basketball in a big way. Sort of followed, I guess because my middle name and now sort of first name Dallas, I was sort of following the Dallas Mavericks. But I think that time I was probably into, it was like the Orlando Magic. That was when Shaquille O'Neal and stuff came in. So I sort of basically followed it all and could basically knew most of, I could probably name all the team names and stuff like that. I even had like NBA Jam for the SNES, which thanks to The Last Dance I now have brought out and have been playing as Pippen and Grant as in the Bulls and stuff like that. Not the overall best team if you look at the stats, but you've got to. And I mean, have you got a bit hooked by the basketball thing? Have you been searching for a pair of vintage Air Jordans on eBay or anything?
No, just a little bit. Kind of more sort of dealt with, really. I've added little things, like I've sort of been reading into articles and so on about it, where it's kind of like I've signed up to The Athletic, so it's sort of, I use it for their sort of football content, but obviously they're a huge sort of American brand, and they've only sort of recently moved into sort of British football. And so I've sort of started reading a lot of the Chicago Bulls pieces that have been kind of coming out sort of since the show started. They've been sort of looking back on the games, sort of elaborating on some of the bits and pieces that you think, oh wow, that's kind of interesting, I would like to know more, and sort of talking about the success of the documentary on the sort of the market for like trading cards and memorabilia, clothes, everything like that. So that's been really good. I quite fancy sort of, I had listened to a couple of odd podcasts as well while sort of out and about, where they sort of focus on sort of it's like the Last Dance post-match discussion on certain episodes, and that's been really good. And I'd heard that sort of ESPN had put up like a sort of a film version of that last game that Jordan played for the Chicago Bulls that we saw sort of in episode 10, where I thought, oh wow, I'd love to kind of watch that. So I've got that kind of downloaded to maybe watch one afternoon, just to watch that full game, sort of play it over sort of the 2.5 hours, as opposed to sort of the condensed maybe 30 minutes that we got on the show. So things like that are just kind of, it's really interesting to sort of just, you get, I suppose, some of these documentaries, you think of like the Tiger King one, people are going, oh, I'm going to go check out the former Louis III one. With this, you have so much content from the past, kind of content being created off the back of it, that it's really quite interesting to sort of revisit all and sort of get as much more information to elaborate on a fantastic doc.
Yeah, I can imagine that they're probably looking at any possible angle they can write something about The Last Dance, because given the fact that there's no new sport happening at the moment, they've got to, I guess, sort of pay the wages and fill their sort of podcasts and websites and papers in some way. So yeah, it's really interesting to sort of look back at this golden age of basketball, the 2-3-peats, and obviously igniting the debate again about the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Is Jordan the greatest of all time? Because it's quite clear in terms of, I think, sort of popularity, visibility, what he brought to the game. It's probably it probably has to be him in terms of natural ability. If you were to talk about wrestling, and I get to talk about wrestling again, if you're talking about the greatest of all time, people will probably talk about, not maybe in terms of raw ability, but in terms of like Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, people who brought the industry to a wider level. And Jordan certainly did that. But I mean, you can just tell, just from the clips that are used, he has such an incredible amount of skill and all. But I think what's interesting about the documentary, and it sort of comes into sort of the later half, is the sort of determination and drive, and sort of people sort of question some of his tactics and stuff like that, where he would basically create in his own head a vendetta against a player just to basically, this guy slighted me once during a game, he managed to double dribble past me or something, so I'm going to then score 40 points on him in the next game and stuff like that. He really did have a ruthless streak to him. I mean, what did you make of that sort of side of the documentary that was not, they had all this footage from that season, and then a lot of the archive, apparently Michael Jordan had full creative control, so he could have cut anything if he didn't want it. But I thought it was interesting that it isn't just a loving and a love fest for Jordan. It does sort of show that he does have darker edges to his personality.
I love stuff like that. I mean, I'm a huge football fan, and I support two teams. One achieves a lot of success in terms of Celtic, and the other in terms of Tottenham Hotspur, very little success. But we've had our moments in the sun, and I find that so fascinating to watch. What makes someone a winner? What is that will to win? And you see it sometimes reduced into films where it's about that inspirational speech, getting over the finish line. And what I loved about this was that you saw what made them such a successful team, in terms of whether you want to, suppose, another American phrase about it is be that Monday morning quarterback, where you're like, well, I disagree with what kind of maybe Jordan did in terms of his approach and his management style towards his sort of teammates, but it's hard to argue with the results and so on. And I think we're so used to sort of quite sanitized sport in a way, where we can look at it and go, oh yeah, we don't really see what's going on behind the in the dressing rooms or sort of in the training, or sometimes what's unfolding. We just get like the post-match interviews, the pre-match chatting on like Sky Sports News, and then what we see in front of the game. And this gives you an insight into what it was like to be a real winner. It wasn't just like one-off. They achieved this sort of three-peat twice, and I loved watching stuff like that. And it was I think it's too easy for a lot of people to go, oh well, maybe he should have done this, or try and make things a little bit more black and white. I think when you're in there, you're not sometimes there to be best friends. You're there to be teammates, to be winners, and sometimes you have to break a few eggs. I mean, there are lines that can be crossed, but very few of them I think were necessarily crossed. I think there was very much on the line, and sort of it was a man's world as such.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, I think you can see that in particular, I think the sort of Isaiah Thomas sort of Detroit Piston rivalry there, where Detroit Pistons were the team and then Chicago eventually took over them, and the sort of the fury and hatred sort of that came out of the fact that the Detroit Pistons just walked off the court after they lost and didn't shake hands, very unsportsmanlike, and then that was held as a grudge, and to the point where Isaiah Thomas wasn't even asked onto the Olympic team because it felt like he had rubbed too many people the wrong way. And ultimately, basketball is a team sport. One would argue that, Jordan is a league unto himself, but, as shown with the 2 years that he took out through his first retirement, that, one player, could potentially make or break a team. The Chicago Bulls weren't really the same without him, but you still needed people like Steve Kerr and sort of John Paxson stuff to make those game-winning shots at times. You can't put it all on one man in the end. It has to be a team. And I think it's interesting because, you mentioned sort of Celtic there and whatever. If you look at Scottish football, the dominance of the two teams, sort of Celtic and Rangers, and then, for a couple of seasons, you had Aberdeen in there and stuff in the 80s and whatever. But what's really interesting about the NBA and a lot of the American systems is stuff like wage caps and the draft picks and stuff, where if you finish really low down the league one year, you will get a top draft pick the next year, and that can sort of make and break and sort of shape new teams. So it's very difficult for a team to get a dynasty like that, the sort of 2-3 peats, I think before that it was only sort of like the Boston Celtics and the LA Lakers, and since then I think you've had like a few teams. I've got my list of NBA champions up here. Recently, the LA Lakers won 3 in a row. Yeah, 2000, 2002, and then they won another 2. There was a couple of 2s, and then the Golden State have won sort of 3 of the last sort of 6 years and stuff like that. But you know, you do get sort of cycles where sort of teams come and go. Unfortunately, my New York Knicks haven't won anything since about the 70s, but 73 was the last time they won. So yeah, it's been a long time, but
I was surprised by that because I remember sort of doing a bit of research after the show ended. I was like, oh, I wonder how the Chicago Bulls got on afterwards, and I was genuinely stunned to see that they hadn't won, the championship. I saw that they'd won their Eastern Division, but they hadn't won sort of after the fact. But obviously a lot of their sort of players had gone on to achieve success. Scottie Pippen, Steve Kerr, Phil Jackson, they'd all done really well, and I think they won kind of further sort of honors and championships as well. So that genuinely surprised me. I would have sort of assumed Chicago Bulls would be sort of in that kind of Man U sort of Man City bracket where it's like they're probably going to win every other kind of couple of seasons or something along those lines. And I was stunned by that.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of think the Man U thing is probably an apt sort of reference point, I think, because if you look at Phil Jackson, he left Chicago Bulls in '98 and then moved to the Lakers, and then the three-peat of the Lakers was Phil Jackson. He's won probably more championships. He then won, he won 3 between 2000 and 2002, took the LA Lakers to the finals in 2004, but lost 2008, lost in the finals, but then won a further 2 2009, 2010. So, he managed to build up essentially another dynasty as well. And then Steve Kerr, who used to play for the Chicago Bulls, is now the sort of head coach at the Golden State Warriors, and he's taken them to 6 consecutive NBA finals in a row as well. So there was that sort of, it really is almost sort of lightning in a bottle, that sort of thing. But, there's some of them have gone to great success. But yeah, it's like, I think they sort of said in the documentary that the NBA Hall of Famers like Charles Barkley and Patrick Ewing and stuff, who never won a championship because they happened to be playing at the same time as Michael Jordan. I guess it's like, everyone says Andy Murray would have won a lot more championships if he hadn't been playing at the exact same time as Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic. But I mean, it's just really interesting to see that, the love for this documentary, and like you say, fans like yourself who are maybe not all that au fait with basketball or fan, but it's drawing them in. And that's something a really great documentary can do. I think of like Senna is one of the great sort of sporting documentaries, Maradona as well. And even though I'm maybe not the biggest, I'm not actually a fan of Formula One at all really, but that documentary really hooked me in. Maradona was fantastic as well. There is, I guess it's all about the person putting it together. I mean, Asif Kabir is a fantastic documentary filmmaker. What was it about this particular documentary that really drew you in?
I think you've nailed it there. It's the hands of the editor on it. I mean, I kind of knew they sort of achieved the Last Dance. Really, they'd achieved the success. But when I was watching that Utah Jazz kind of championship and stuff, and like that last game, and it was the same for a lot of them, but in particular that last game where it was so close to going to the 7th, and you would assume the sort of Chicago Bulls would probably stumble. Jordan's exhausted, Pippen's crocked his back. It was probably going to be that one game too far. I mean, I've never sort of watched an out-and-out game of basketball as the outside of sort of Uncut Gems, and that was stressful enough. But God, I was stressed again sort of watching it sort of in this game unfold where it was that thin margins, just fractions of a second, where I'm thinking in my head, like, you can't achieve much in that time. I suppose my mentality is like thinking of like the size of a football pitch, yes, seconds count in football, but what you can do in a fraction of a second in basketball is so much more kind of condensed for sort of that drama. And I was just like, I was like, how are they going to get out of it? Is it going to be to a draw? Is it going to be that? You know, the cutting back and forth of Pippen going to the locker room to get some work on his back. I mean, I was just so engaged and stressed, and was really hoping that they would succeed and so on. I was sitting there like, God, I hate this Utah Jazz. Like, they're making it so difficult. And, you know, I just thought it was just the master of kind of editing. I was just really interested in these people, but, you know, the game footage was just unlike anything I'd kind of ever seen.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have to give credit to the director, which is Jason Hehir, and I'm going to look for the editors, because, like you say, it's all about the editing. Obviously, a lot of that editing is is from the archive footage, and therefore, you know, you've got to be down to like ESPN and sort of NBC and stuff like that, who are recording it live and stuff like that. But the series was edited by Chad Beck, Devin Cunningham, Abe Sofsky, and Bez Sonaski. So full credit to them, because they really sort of draw you in. And even though I guess it's that thing, almost that Apollo 13 effect, where you know the ending, if you're someone like me who knew how it ended, you're still sort of wondering how they're going to pull this off. And like you say, it's almost incomparable to football. I mean, this would be like the Champions. I mean, I guess for you it would have been that effect of, I think it was, you watched Tottenham in, was it Amsterdam, where they managed to make a comeback. It'd be that kind of sort of live feeling for all the fans in the stadium. But it'd be like Barcelona sort of playing Real Madrid for a cup, and like Messi getting an injury but then going off and then getting some treatment and then being allowed back on for a bit of the game and then going off again and stuff like that. Obviously, you know, basketball has different rules. You know, substitutions are allowed all the time, but you've got like the stop clocks. You know, you can, with like 0.7 of a second left, you can still make a play by getting it to someone and they throw off a shot, and then you're just wondering if it's going to meet the buzzer. It's just that intense. I mean, I've been lucky enough to see 3 Knicks games in the Garden, and it's just an incredible experience. They won 2 games, lost the last one, and after the last game I watched where they lost, the head coach got fired the day after. So I don't know if that was my fault or not.
The kiss of death.
Absolutely.
I love that, where it's like, you think of places like New York and Chicago, they're such big sporting cities. You know, you've got the White Sox, the Cubs, the Chicago Bears, and I thought like Chicago Bulls, and it's such a really interesting insight as well into like the intense kind of fandom and stuff. And I read a really good article the other day where it was like talking about how you used to be able to just go to this like local gym in Chicago and you could see the sort of team just like working out and so on. And I thought they had really captured what Chicago was like, you know, to be a Bull player in, and sort of the fever these fans had as they were sort of chasing their glory, and, you know, sometimes getting a bit ahead of themselves, like that. And the Game 5, I think it was, for example, where they were all just like, you know, the things were boarded up and everything like that, and they were just like, you know, they had already pissed off the Utah Jazz enough to say, right, we are going to go out and we are going to beat them, like, you know, and give a little quip at the end about the boarded up windows.
Yeah, no, it's just fascinating, especially, you know, you can see that, and this was of course in the time before social media and stuff like that, so people would only really get, you know, the footage of the players and stuff like that through the TV, through news channels, through the papers and stuff like that, and to still have this same level of fandom is crazy. And, you know, one of the most surprising things I think I got from the documentary was, I kind of remember like the flu thing, but of course they had you know, it's Netflix, they need to pull through on an extra level of conspiracy, so you've got this sort of food poisoning gate thing there. But I did find it funny that Spike Lee directed the Air Jordan commercials. Given that he's a diehard Knicks fan, I thought, would he not have turned that down? I don't know. I thought he was a man of principles.
Yeah, it seems that someone like Jordan, I suppose from what little I knew of him sort of going in, he seems to be someone that kind of transcends that, you know, people, you know, he was considered this role model, this huge breakout black athlete. And I suppose, you know, you kind of put some allegiances to one side for things like that. And I suppose you see that with, you know, as you touched on, someone like Messi today, you could be the most diehard sort of AC Milan, Liverpool thing, but maybe the opportunity to work and sort of do a bit of visual art or an advert for someone like that, you're like, well, you know what, I want to be associated with that. You know, it seems like everyone wanted to be associated with Jordan, and we certainly saw a few celebrities along the way. You know, I imagine Jerry Seinfeld, based on Seinfeld, as a Knicks fan like you, didn't have a problem hanging out with them in the locker room, making some stilted chat. You know, you see Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm pretty sure he's a Lakers fan. You know, Justin Timberlake, you know, it didn't matter matter where in the country you were from or probably who you supported, you wanted to be around this guy.
Yeah, no, he just had a presence and a quality, and it's interesting, of course, that they sort of end the series there rather than, so it was about the Chicago Bulls rather than Jordan himself, and it didn't follow on with his I'm coming out of retirement again and playing for the Washington Wizards and stuff like that. It's like, I think it's good that they ended it there, because it really was, like you say, it's the end of an era and the closing of a chapter for Chicago, who have just not managed to go on and sort of achieve the same level of success. But
I agree with you. I think I've seen some criticism of that, or I saw like a joke yesterday, like can't wait for episodes 11 and 12 where it shows like those future years. But I prefer documentaries like this. I mean, you think of that really successful documentary, the Maradona one. It's just like, here's a moment in time. Okay, that film was like 2 and a bit hours. This is like a 10-part hour, series. I'd rather see like one period of time and do it well. And I think documentaries have got better than that. And I think some biopics as well, where it's like, instead of trying to tell this whole story of someone's life that you can't possibly do justice for, just focus on some parts of it, and you can make something that is just so incredible. That story can be told another day and another time. I'm sure it will. But I thought that period that they covered, was really well done. And sort of they did touch on the past as well to set things up, but I just loved it. It certainly made it all the more intense and gave you sort of that fever.
Yeah, no, because you've got this. I mean, the initial documentary filmmakers, who'd covered that season must have been like, we're here to cover a regular season. They're going for the three-peat, and then pretty much on day one, Jerry Krause sort of says, well, Phil Jackson's not going to come back. And then, Jordan's like, well, I probably won't come back. And then they're like, oh, hang on, we actually might have something here. This is good. Rather than going for the three-peat, it's like, this is actually the end of an era, and we've got really something. It's like the wrestling documentary, Wrestling with Shadows, where it's like following Bret Hart over a certain period of time, and then it just happens to be that they capture the time with the Montreal screw job where Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels basically screw him out of the championship. He was meant to leave the WWE as champion, but they decided to pull an audible, as they say, and sort of cheat him out of it. And then you get the whole back thing where he basically punches out Vince McMahon. It's like, you're just in the right place at the right time, and I think that's what they had there. And I think it was the right decision to, and I found it interesting to, I mean, was it an issue for you, sort of the sort of switching back and forth between timelines, between the sort of the second three-peat and going back to the first three-peat with the different teams, and how did you find sort of each episode kind of sort of focusing on an individual player? So you had like Pippin's issues, and then you had the colourful character of Rodman and stuff like that.
A little bit at first I struggled, but that was really my own fault. I kind of had it on in the background while I was working, like I think a lot of us are doing, work just now, but there's something on in the background, whether it's sort of a movie you watched a million times or maybe something from Netflix. And I was like, I thought it was all about this last season, and I was just trying to I was kind of dipping in and out, so I wouldn't maybe always see the the slide and back and forth through time. But kind of once I got gripped within sort of that second or so episode, I was like, right, I'm following this now. And I think I was maybe focusing a little bit more on the TV than my computer screen for work. So I was kind of taking it in a lot well, and I really liked the sort of especially in those sort of first 5 or 6 episodes before sort of the real push into those kind of final seasons and stuff, like focusing in on certain characters like Dennis Rodman. I always think of the one I really thought was a huge stand. I think it was episode 9, where Steve Kerr really comes to the forefront, and we really learn a lot about this guy. I mean, I kind of learned after the fact that he'd only ever started 30 games in his whole career. I don't know if that's high or low necessarily in something like basketball, but I found that quite surprising. And I just thought the story of his life, the tragedy he also had with his father as well, I thought kind of was surprising, very emotional. And I thought Steve Kerr was one of these sort of heroes of the documentary, where I think people will probably come out of it with a lot of respect for him, like me that was only just met him, or maybe people that have been lifelong fans that are maybe going to reevaluate his contribution.
I mean, the sort of starting lineup, that's like your A team. It's pretty much sort of locked in. For that time, it was you're guaranteed to basically start with Rodman, Grant, Pippen, Jordan, and probably sort of Bill Cartwright in the centre position and stuff. So it would have been very difficult, for someone like Kerr, whatever, to make the starting lineup. And I guess he was probably seen as more of a clutch player until, of course, that moment where he saves the day and stuff like that, and then he was guaranteed sort of. I mean, I guess it's not about how you start. I guess it's, especially in basketball, it's about how you finish, because like you say, anything can happen. And like, it's like American football with the, it's almost not even worth watching the game until the final quarter, which then takes about 2-3 hours in itself. Anything can change. So it's just fascinating to watch and sort of get all these sort of live reactions, and then also sort of the reminiscence of what people were thinking at that time as well. It's just really interesting. And like you say, you've, outside of this one, it's only really sort of Uncut Gems that you've probably watched. I mean, it's a hell of a year for basketball content on Netflix. I mean, you've got last year's sort of High Flying Bird, which is a great film, which actually about basketball, but actually doesn't feature any basketball on it. But there's also, I think you can get like Coach Carter, and there's a few other sort of basketball films and documentaries out there. Mubi, I know you were planning to watch it until you found out it was nearly 3 hours long. 1984's Hoop Dreams, about following two Chicago Bull fans, about following them through school and college and trying to make the NBA and stuff like that. Are you going to be going down the rabbit hole of basketball content since we've got on lockdown? I'd say at least until sort of looking like end of July, August, probably, before we're back out in the wild.
Yeah, I kind of quite fancied downloading sort of Hoop Dreams last week from, I can't remember what it was. I think it was, iTunes, where it was like a couple bucks. Oh, I'm going to check that out. And then I got the email from Mubi yesterday, and I was like, right, I'm going to get on that. And I had the intention of watching it this morning. I thought, I've got a few conference calls and meetings. I'll have it on in the background. I'll stream it on Mubi. And then I looked at the runtime for like 176 minutes. Like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to fit that one in today. But I've got the time to watch it. I mean, I kind of actually recently watched one that I thought was excellent. I don't know if you've seen it. Lenny Cook, Dallas, from the Safdie brothers.
No, I haven't actually seen that one.
Yeah, really good. I picked up for a few weeks ago for sort of 99 cents on iTunes USA to rent. So it's a Safdie brothers documentary from 2013. So it follows this guy. He's like considered Lenny Cook, so he's sort of considered like he was the number one ranked high school basketball player at the time, and sort of he was considered being alongside the LeBrons and so on, and then he went into the like 2002 draft, and it all went really badly wrong. So it's like a 2-part documentary where it's like following like, is this guy going to be a success? He's going to get drafted, the advice he was given, and then sort of what happened next. And it's a really good documentary. So I caught that one, kind of a couple of weeks before all the Last Dance stuff, but only came around because I was sort of trying to fill in some of the missing spots in the Safdie brothers documentary. So that's a really good one to check out as well.
No, it's I'll be downloading it as soon as this podcast is over, I think. So, but I mean, the big question, of course, is it's on Netflix just now. Have you watched Space Jam yet?
Well, I want to, yeah. I think I was like last week. I was like, oh, I really want to watch Space Jam again because I saw it at the cinema as a kid. I was never a big kind of Looney Tunes, sort of the Warner Brother house kind of cartoon fan. I was sort of more into Nickelodeon at the time, but I enjoyed the film, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it as an adult. So me and my girlfriend would watch some sporadic episodes of The Last Dance together, but she wasn't invested in like watching all of them. So I think we'll probably watch that one together next week. We were doing like a like general knowledge quiz last week online, and one of the questions was like, what was the name of the team in the Space Jam film, and my girlfriend remembered it, so I think she has stronger memories of it than I do, so I think we're looking forward to revisiting it.
The Toon Squad, wasn't it?
That's it. Yeah,
well, it's only an hour and 28, so I think you've got no problem whatsoever. You see, Hoop Dreams, you know what their problem was? 3 hours. If they'd released that as 6 half-hour episodes, people would have blitzed that in a night, no worries. It's the Irishman effect, isn't it? It's like, 3.5 hours long. No way. But if you do it split into episodes, people will binge that in a night, no problem. It's psychological.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly.
Cool. So, if I had to press you on, if you were to be an NBA supporter now, which team would you be following? Would you be following the Chicago Bulls, or are you going to be following someone who's maybe a bit more successful? Would you be glory hunting in the NBA?
I kind of probably would still stick with I've known about the Boston Celtics for longer, so obviously there's that Irish connection with the football team that I currently support. I've been to Boston 2 times, So yeah, I like their jersey and their logo and so on. So I'd probably kind of verge with them, but I'll certainly be staying subscribed to the news for Chicago Bulls for the next while during lockdown to kind of get the updates on sort of more post-match Last Dance documentary stuff. So I wouldn't say I'm a kind of fan of the Chicago Bulls, but I'm very interested in the subject. And, I remembered when we were watching an episode, microphone, it'd be quite good to go to a game or something like that. So, fortunately, when we were in Chicago last time, the timing didn't work out. I did look at it. So, it would be good to go back to Chicago again, which is, one of my favourite places, and maybe kind of catch one of the Bulls games.
Absolutely. You just have to hopefully time it for a time when there's a really good team coming to town.
But then probably based on what I saw in that documentary, if there's a good game or in success on the way, it's going to be hard to get tickets. So I probably have to hope it's going to be like an awful team or something like that to stand any chance.
Well, whenever I went over, I managed to get tickets fairly close to the day, even if it was a good team, whatever. But you ended up kind of up in the nosebleed. You'll be up in the bleeders. So yeah, but I know that the NBA did come to London on occasion. They would play the O2 Arena. They would always send over, it's either exhibition games or like the NFL. They do a couple of games each season. Obviously, probably won't be happening anytime soon, but I certainly would be up for going down to London if the NBA comes back and watching a game live, because there's just something about the atmosphere and of course the cheerleaders as well. Always welcome.
Are you going to take your Knicks jacket, your Knicks top, or your Kevin Garnett Boston Celtics one?
My Game 7 original KG sweat. Yeah, maybe. I do have a Dallas Mavericks jersey that has King on the back. I got it made when I was in America one time. You could get your name put on the back so I got Dallas on the front and King on the back. So I thought that was quite cool. But I think I hope for more documentaries about other aspects of it. I mean, obviously, there was the tragic news about Kobe Bryant recently as well. But I think I could see that he was sort of mentioned in the same sort of sentences. You've got talk like LeBron and Kobe are the two names that have probably come up since Jordan that people have sort of said could be considered some of the greatest of all time. So I expect there might be a Kobe documentary at some point, and it'd be really interesting to see, because you saw him very briefly in this documentary. He was just coming up. It was sort of his first season. Still got schooled by Michael, because he always would. He's teaching these rookies a lesson. But I think we can basically say, if you haven't already seen it, you've got plenty of time on lockdown, so make sure you catch all 10 episodes of The Last Dance. It's completely worth it. But we have been watching other things during lockdown, or maybe even listening or reading things. So, Lee, what is your recommendation of the week?
Yeah, so I'm going to base something that's based on what we've just watched. So I would recommend the podcast After the Last Dance. So it's kind of one of these ones that's become so popular with these sorts of things, where there's a podcast after the episode where someone breaks down the thing, and you pick up some more stories and some insights and memories from people that kind of were watching this all unfold. So that's been a really good series. So they've just done their winners and losers of the Last Dance documentary. And I think the next one's they're going to be talking about the shoes of the Last Dance, which I think could be quite interesting. I'm sure there's definitely more than a niche market for that one. So yeah, that's been a really good pod to listen to.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll put that on my rotation. And for me, I'm going to be recommending a Kickstarter. Perhaps an odd thing to recommend, but if you've listened to the podcast, you'll know that we're big fans of Duncan Jones, and he has announced his latest project, which will be the concluding part of his Mooniverse trilogy. Maddie, Once Upon a Time in the Future, is going to be a graphic novel. He looked at the budget and decided there was no way that he was probably going to be able to get a budget to make it. He obviously famously struggled to get Mute made before Netflix stepped in with the financing. So he's decided to turn this one into a graphic novel, sort of co-written by Alex DeCampi and then illustrated and coloured by a variety of different artists. This is now currently available to order on Kickstarter. You can order the softback paperback, you can order the hardback, or you can order a deluxe slipcase. The Kickstarter has already reached its quite a manageable target of $40,000. It's now somewhere in the region of about $275,000. So there's now stretch goals involved, so you can get extra prints, potentially sort of pin badges, patches, and stuff like that added to it if they manage to get to their grand total of 500,000. The Kickstarter runs to the 19th of June, and then the graphic novel will be sent out in November. I ordered my copy of this last week, and Lee, I believe you have as well.
Yeah, I have indeed. Yeah, I've put in for it. Like, it's been a long wait. I remember the opening weekend for Source Code. I was down at a convention thing in London, and Duncan Jones was on talking about Source Code, and he talked about they'd love to do this graphic novel. So I've been waiting for this moment, and I'm sure it's going to be nailed on that we will continue our Duncan Jones series by reviewing this at some point, maybe later in the year.
Absolutely. I think we can dedicate a whole episode to us talking and describing our way through a graphic novel. I'm sure that'll be excellent content for everyone. But, we could do a read-along. Everyone get your copy and we'll do a read-along. But, because there was talk at one point of Mute getting a graphic novel as well, even to the point where they'd actually made up some artwork, I think, which was given away at one of the San Diego Comic Cons. That's something I still wish I could get my hands on. But I think the artist was Glenn Fabry, who's one of the artists involved in this project. But this is going to be really exciting, especially to see how, if nothing else, how this ties in with the Mooniverse. Is it going to be a sneaky Sam Rockwell cameo somewhere in the background? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But if you're a fan of Duncan Jones, get on that. It's on Kickstarter. We'll put the link up on we always tweet out our recommendations. So if you head to the Join Nerd Party on Twitter, you'll find all the details on there as well. But Lee, if people want to chat basketball with you, or even just anything else, where can they find you on social media these days?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee Hutchison _.
Cool. And you can get me at DallasKing1138. So it looks like our time is nearly up. 0.7 on the clock. The ball's away. The buzzer is off. Game over. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.